have another brilliant speaker in front of us. We have a talk on A Tale of Two Sisters. This is by Kirby Lambert. And Kirby, for those of you that don't know him, worked at the Montana Historical Society from 1985. Wow. Through 2021, serving as a registrar and curator before assuming the position of Outreach and Interpretation Program Manager. Kirby received an MA in Museum Studies and his BA from Texas, History and English from Texas Tech in Lubbock. He's a contributing author to the Montana State Capitol, the People's House, and the Masterworks of Charles M. Russell, a retrospective of painting and sculptures. As you all know, many of you know, Kirby has lovingly curated and planned the history conference over the years, and he remains a North Star for us in terms of art, history, and culture in Helena and in Montana. We're so grateful to have Kirby here with us.
Thank you, Darby, for that extra nice introduction. Not 100% sure how this is going to work because I feel like I'm standing right in the middle of your way. You can't hear me? Oh, is that better? Okay. I'm just going to read or look at my notes here. Am I in your way totally if I stand here? Really? Okay. And what about the lights? Can they come down just a little bit to get a better, this is pretty visual. I want you to be able to see the art. If they don't, no big deal. But I really wanted to start this talk out, Tale of Two Sisters, by saying that they were the best of nuns, they were the worst of nuns. Unfortunately, that's simply not true. I think many would say they were the best of nuns. I don't think they fit anyone's definition of the worst of nuns. Okay, so I was introduced to Mother Raphael and Sister Trinitas in 1997 when the Historical Society was in the process of putting together an exhibit on Montana's women artists. I came up to Great Falls to do research, talked about borrowing paintings, and I just had this incredible experience. In the morning, I went to the Ursuline Center and was introduced to Mother Raphael and her marvelous chapel. And I just loved everything there. There's so much history at the Ursuline Center. If you've never been, you really need to go. That afternoon, I went to the College of Great Falls and was introduced to Sister Trinitas and went into her chapel. And I was just kind of blown away by the juxtaposition of these two chapels and how they each encapsulated not only the artistry of a particular artist, but a time and a place. And there was so much that was similar about them, and yet the artistic effect, the aesthetic feel was just about as different as you can get. It's kind of an impact that's never faded for me, and the more I know about these women, the greater my interest grows. So Mother Raphael was born Teresa Schweda, and the Order of St. Ursula traces its origins back to 16th century Italy, where it was founded by St. Angela Merici, and it spread initially to France, and then the rest of Europe, and eventually around the world. The Ursulines were the first order ever founded exclusively for the education of young women. Yes. So the order, let's see, that didn't go forward. I just want to point out, when you see OSU, that is Order of St. Ursula, it's not Oregon State, which I kept wondering what the relationship between the Ursuline convent and Oregon State was, and I figured it out. It didn't take me too long. So the first Ursulines arrived in North America in Quebec in 1639, and today the Ursuline convent in Quebec City remains the oldest, North America's oldest institution dedicated to the education of women. The first Ursulines came to Montana in 1884, initially to Miles City, and then a few months later to St. Peter's Mission west of Cascade. And after earlier attempts had failed by the Jesuits to found a mission at St. Peter's, they finally succeeded in 1874, and among other endeavors there, opened a school for boys. 10 years later, Helena's Bishop Brondell invited the Sisters of or the Ursulines to come from Toledo and open a school for girls as well. That same year, 1884, on the other side of the world, Teresa Schweda was born in the town of Wartha, Germany. She was one of 14 children, and her interest in art began at a very young age. She wanted to be an artist, but her mother told her she could not be both an artist and a servant of God. And that was something she would prove to be a dictate, she would prove to be false. At the age of 13, she was given a scholarship to study at the Dusseldorf Art Academy. And before coming to the US, she also studied in Saxony and Vienna. After she came to the US, she continued her education. She got a BA in art from St. Catherine's College in St. Paul, and an MA from Notre Dame. So meanwhile, back in Montana, the story of St. Peter's Mission is a fascinating one. And by the late 1800s, it comprised one of the most significant communities between Helena and Great Falls. However, the departure of the Jesuits in 1896 and a devastating fire in 1908 prompted the Ursulines to reload their headquarters here to Great Falls, although they continued to operate the girls' school until it too burned in 1918. After 4 years of planning and construction, the Mount Angela Ursuline Academy boarding and day school opened in Great Falls in 1912. Noted Great Falls architect George Shanley designed the building in a collegiate Gothic revival style as a clear statement that this was a place dedicated to education and tradition. At the height, the convent housed 40 nuns and had an enrollment of 250 students. Details concerning Mother Raphael's immigration to and early movements around the US are lacking, but in 1912, she came to Miles City to visit her sister there. A few months later, she was at St. Peter's Mission, where she took her initial vows, and then 2 years later in Great Falls at the Academy, she took her final vows. It's not clear exactly when she moved from St. Peter's to the Electric City, but for the remainder of her life, she would be a key player in the stories of both the Ursuline Academy and the Great Falls art community. By 1927, Mother Raphael was already a well-established fixture at the Ursuline Academy, recognized for her dedication as an art and drama teacher. In that year, she completed a project that she'd been working on for the past 4 years. 3 murals to adorn the altar in the Academy's chapel. This is the chapel before the murals were installed. The statue of the Sacred Heart, as well as those of Joseph and Mary, removed from St. Peter's Mission. And here we see the completed murals and the dramatic impact they had on the chapel's appearance. Today, they remain the most celebrated feature of the chapel and are widely considered by most people to be Mother Raphael's most iconic work. This picture from the 1927 Academy Yearbook shows the mural in Mother Raphael's studios just prior to being installed in the chapel. The panel on the left depicts St. Ursula and her companions as they're led by the angel of victory to eternal bliss following her martyrdom, along with the execution of her 11,000 followers in 4th century Germany because of their devotion to Christ. The panel on the right depicts St. Angela Merici's vision, wherein St. Ursula tells her, God has sent you this vision to show you that before your death, you will found an order of virgins who will spend their lives in education of young girls. Academy students posed for Mother Raphael while she painted the mural, so the faces of the completed figures would have been recognizable to those who knew them. The central panel was originally designed as a backdrop for a statue of the Sacred Heart, which sat above the high altar. A newspaper article reporting on the completion of the murals describes the installation thusly. The Roman barrel arches are supported by pilasters surmounted by Gothic corbels finished in antique bronze. The spandrels of the arches are set off by bronze plaques, symbols of martyrdom, victory, and virginity. The wall is finished in a stone effect, creating a quiet, massive setting. Create a quiet, massive setting. And today you can see that the Sacred Heart statue has been replaced by a crucifix, and the faux stones have been painted over, and it's a much simpler look than originally. That same 1927 newspaper article went on to state that for 400 years, the Ursulines have kept in the progressive path of science and culture, educating the daughters of nobles as well as the children of peasants. For 14 years, Mount Angela Ursuline Academy has stood as a sentinel on the Boston Heights to bear testimony of the progress of the Ursulines as well as their success as educators. Not surprisingly, given the overwhelming reception of the triptych painted for the Ursuline Chapel, in the mid-1930s, Mother Raphael received a number of significant commissions for large-scale murals from other religious institutions in Montana and across the Northwest. These included St. Patrick's Hospital in Missoula, the chapel at St. Francis Xavier Novitiate near Salem, Oregon, St. Jude's in Havre, Holy Family Church here in Great Falls, and the National Shrine of St. Teresa on an island off the coast of Juneau. Okay, so how to, Darby, do you know how to get this down for? Oh, well. Anyway, I have a quote about how wonderful she was that I can't remember because I didn't memorize it. But anyway, it talks about saying that these murals are so great and very adaptable, which I thought was an interesting word to use for an artwork. But also that Montana should be proud because it was one of her daughters that completed these. So in addition to these large format murals, throughout her career, Mother Raphael executed and exhibited easel paintings in places as far away as New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., but most often in Great Falls, where her works were exhibited alongside such Montana luminaries as O.C. Seltzer, Shorty Shope, Jody Young, Rolf DeCamp, Branson Stevenson, Charlie Bill, and John L. Clark. I even read one thing that said she was a student of Charlie Russell's, and that is blatantly not true. So, likewise, she frequently exhibited her own paintings along with those of her students. And even though she was dedicated to her own art, first and foremost, she always viewed herself as a teacher. In 1964, while celebrating her 50th anniversary at the Academy, she shared some of her philosophy, maintaining that to be a successful teacher, one had to remain humble. A strict disciplinarian, she admonished that there were no shortcuts to becoming an artist, and that nature, the best of all teachers, should be studied at all times. For inspiration and instruction, she called on the masters like Botticelli, Raphael, El Greco, Titian, and Michelangelo. And as for modern art, it is not art, she said emphatically, it is non-art. The majority of her work, especially early on, was religious in nature. In a 1934 lecture devoted to the subject of Madonna paintings, she used Raphael's Sistine Madonna as a praiseworthy example and impressed upon her listeners the practical value of good religious pictures in the home. And she recommended that each student should have at least one of the copies of a celebrated Madonna in her own room. And these are just a couple of examples of Mother Raphael's Madonnas. By the middle of the century, portraiture had also become a specialty of hers, and she particularly enjoyed the challenge of discovering and defining character in the faces of her subjects. Her studio was on the 5th floor of the Ursuline Academy, and you can see the little inset there. It's a really great space with great views. The newspaper article, so she not only painted there, she taught students from the academy, and she also gave private lessons. The newspaper article celebrating her Golden Jubilee noted that students from 8 years old to married couples found their talents and lives reshaped under the guidance of gifted fingers and a mind that forever thirsted for greater knowledge, and in turn gave of that knowledge. Because there was no running water in this 5th floor studio, every day she carried the water upstairs needed for cleaning brushes and watercolors and that sort of thing. That is in spite of the fact that she was only 5'2" and weighed 100 pounds. And she also taught 7 days a week, even on Sundays, because she got permission from one of the priests to teach on Sundays and said it was okay. From 1932 to 1942, she taught at what has become the University of Providence. And more detail on that in a minute, but during Mother Raphael's tenure, it was generally just referred to as the junior college. And for many years, she served as the school's primary art teacher while still continuing her efforts at the Ursuline Academy. In addition to teaching art, during her early years of the academy, she also taught singing, and throughout the 1930s taught drama and directed annual passion plays and Christmas pageants, shows to which she also contributed the costuming and the scenery. Beyond the classroom, Mother Raphael shared her talents with the community in a variety of ways, and perhaps maybe one of the most unusual being the painting of 2 special slumber rooms at Croxford Funeral Home, which opened in 1931. And one of these rooms was for children. She painted Jack and the Beanstalk and Alice in Wonderland motifs. That's the one in black and white. It unfortunately suffered some water damage, is no longer there. The other room is what she called the Montana Skies Room. They now call it the Sunset Room, but it is still there and still in use. Mother Raphael became a U.S. citizen in 1950, but throughout her life, she continued to speak in, quote, still strong German tones. Ill health forced her to retire from teaching, but she continued to reside at the academy until she died in 1972 at the age of 87. Her greatest influence lay on the worshipers impacted by her paintings that adorned their churches and on her students, the most notable of whom included Jim Todd, who spent 30 years as a professor at the University of Montana. But even former students who didn't go on to become artists sometimes included the fact that they studied with Mother Raphael in their obituaries. And I found that as kind of a striking example of how much impact she had on their lives. So book the second, Sister Trinitas. So originally known as the Daughters of Charity, Servants of the Poor, the Sisters of Providence devoted themselves to caring for those in need. The order was founded in Montreal in 1843 by Emily Gamelin, who responded to tragedy in her own life, the death of her husband and children, by reaching out to Montreal's most vulnerable citizens. The first Sisters of Providence to come to Montana arrived at St. Ignatius in October 1864 after an arduous journey by ship and horseback from Montreal by way of Panama, Vancouver, and Walla Walla, Washington. The Sisters of Providence opened the Electric City's first hospital in 1892 and the state's first nursing school in 1894. In 1932, the sisters partnered with the Ursulines to establish the Great Falls Junior College for women, and separately, that same year, the following year, they established the Great Falls Normal School for teachers. In 1937, Great Falls Junior College began admitting men, and in 1938, it became a 4-year school. And in 1942, the Ursulines withdrew from operations of the college, and the Sisters of Providence took over that college. And then the following year, the normal school became part of the Great Falls College. And all of that is complicated. And the only reason I mention it all is to say, because after 1942, when the Ursulines departed, Mother Raphael was no longer involved at the college. Instead, there was a new nun in town. One of 7 children, Rose Albin Morin, was born in Minnesota in 1908. When she was 2, her family moved to Missoula, where her dad owned a lumber yard. At an early age, she learned to draw and sew, and she learned about woodworking by watching her brothers in the family business. Later in life, she reminisced, "It was a thrill as a youngster to watch my brothers work. They were expert craftsmen with wood, and I believed I learned more just watching them than I have ever learned from any other source." In high school, she attended Sacred Heart Academy in Missoula, which was operated by the Sisters of Providence. And after graduating and a brief stint at nursing school, she entered that order's novitiate in Seattle in 1927. And following her final vows in Seattle in 1932, Sister Mary Trinitas, who was more commonly known as just Sister Trinitas, taught art and French in Idaho and Washington, and returned to Montana in 1933, where she taught at Great Falls Normal School and then back at Sacred Heart in Missoula. In 1936, Sister Trinitas returned to the College of Great Falls, where she remained until her death 30 years later. A devoted lifelong learner like Mother Raphael, she continued her own education by attending summer school at the Universities of Oregon and Washington and at St. Catherine's College, where she received her BA in 1940. She attended the Art Institute of Chicago in 1945 and received her MA from Catholic University in Washington, D.C. in 1952. But in addition to her formal education, Sister Trinitas was also adept at learning new techniques from other artists and craft people wherever she found herself. While studying in DC, she made a side trip to Baltimore, where she reportedly walked into a glass factory and announced that she had come to learn the techniques of stained glass. And, quote, learned them she did to their amazement and delight. Ultimately, Sister Trinitas was hailed as one of the Northwest's most highly respected artists and praised as an unsurpassed master of design and technique. The hallmarks of her career were diversity and modernism. As part of her master's thesis in Washington, D.C., she created this, quote, what they called it a grill of metal and stained glass that shows John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, and a local newspaper described it as one of the most unusual works ever produced in the Catholic University's art department. Later, Branson Stevenson, a Great Falls artist and a close friend of Sister Trinitas, would describe her as being as modern as the day after tomorrow's newspaper. And while such aesthetics were not necessarily to everyone's liking, Sister Trinitas insisted that modern art was to be seen not just with the eyes, but it was also to be seen with the mind. She was a virtuoso in multiple media, including oils and watercolors, stained glass, fabric art, metalwork, calligraphy, and silk screening. A potter in her own right, she was reportedly the first educator in the state to use a kiln in a college classroom. And she was a master silversmith and metalworker who could, quote, outpound the average man with a silversmith's hammer and work steadily on her feet an unimaginable number of hours. She loved to experiment, and long before it was popular, she frequently incorporated found objects and recycles materials into her work, which earned her a reputation as a scavenger. And like Mother Raphael, Sister Trinitas art is epitomized in her institution's chapel, which was a featured part of the college's new campus that opened in 1960. You just heard about many of the people involved in the construction and completion of this campus, but know that although these other people were involved, when it came to the chapel, the interior of this building belonged to Sister Trinitas. To complete the project, she was given a year's of leave from her teaching duties, and she did have a couple of carefully selected student assistants, and several of her fellow nuns also helped her, but the vision was hers and the design was hers, with the approval of the bishop, of course. The chapel's focal point, literally and symbolically, was the 4-foot-high crucifix hanging over the altar. It took her 200 hours to carve the figure, which is carved out of pine that came from the Seeley Lake area. Her father harvested the timber, and her brother laminated the boards. The corpus hangs on a cross of tamarack that also came from Seeley Lake, and the crucifix is backed by a mosaic of supposedly 11,000 ceramic tiles. I didn't actually count the ceramic tiles. That seems like a lot to me, but it is beautiful, and the way when the light hits it just right, the way it radiates is pretty amazing. She did go to the bricks. I believe this is true. The bricks came from the Archibray in Helena. She went to the Archibray to make sure that the clay for the tiles matched that of the bricks. So she was very controlling, we might say. She designed and carved the 14 stations of the cross from applewood, recycled from the original Columbus Hospital. And Vincent Werner, one of the building's architects, praised the integrity of her work within the architectural setting, which she achieved by selecting the size of the plaques to that of the chapel. He also commented on the uniqueness of her choice of light wood plaques placed against dark wall panels. and noted that she achieved what she did by simplicity. He said, complication is easy, simplicity is hard, and he praised her for her ability to do that. The choir features 7-foot-high stained glass windows depicting Christ and the 12 apostles, as well as the apostolic mandate to go and teach all nations. And when Sister Trinitas died, her colleague, Sister Providentia, told the story of an art professor who came from California. This art professor, whom she never named, didn't know Trinitas personally, but she had heard about her and her reputation as an innovator. So she declared when she saw these windows, why she is amazingly modern. She is, she shows very religiously and something the very latest in pop art. These windows must be seen by the art world. We need to take them to San Francisco. Sister Trinitas saw to the smallest detail involved in finishing the chapel, including candlesticks, silver cruets, and even the priest's vestments. And summarizing the impact of the completed chapel, newly built on land that had shortly been empty, sand dunes, the devout quoted from the book of Isaiah, saying, "Wilderness and wasteland will rejoice. The desert will be glad and blossom. They will see the glory of the Lord, the beauty of our God." Leslie kind of hinted at this, but so the chapel was not the only building to benefit from her artistry, but whatever impact she had on the physical campus, she had an even greater impact on her students. But this was something that really impressed me, that even 60 years later, this is in the ceramic studio at the college, and she's still instructing the students. These are the cabinets where they store chemicals and stuff, and her formulas and other information is still on the signs, handwritten by her, like I say, 60 years ago. Throughout her life, whatever she learned, or as was so often the case, whatever she taught herself to do, she did so that she could, in turn, teach it to others. According to her colleague, Sister Providentia, she was very definite in her ideas, but she never tried to impose a certain style on her students, as some teachers do. She was, however, intolerant of laziness or careless work. If she had faults, they were those of great enthusiasm and count no cost type of devotedness. Among her many other notable achievements, in 1948, Sister Trinitas was a founding member of the Montana Institute of the Arts. In 1957, she authored a chapter titled Cultural Development in Montana for the 2-volume History of Montana, edited by Merle Burlingame and K. Ross Toole. And she was the first Montanan to teach a 4-credit college course in art on television. The course was called Introduction to Visual Arts, and it was, quote, a monstrous job to transport all the demonstration materials once a week to the TV station. At her funeral, Father Fox delivered the eulogy, noting that 32 years of Sister Trinitas's life were spent at the College of Great Falls. Here she has been a source of delight and pride, always an optimist, ever an unabashed critic of the tawdry and the commonplace, dauntlessly pleading the urgency of whatever order and good taste demanded. She knew that, as St. Thomas put it, no man can live without delight. The city of Great Falls and her own religious community, as well as the College of Great Falls, owe her greatly for this. So, to wrap this up, I'm going to ask a question that I can only answer by conjecture. What was the relationship between Mother Raphael and Sister Trinitas? Their careers overlapped for a 30-year period, and Great Falls just isn't that big of a place. But and they did share some students like Jim Todd, who had both women as teachers. But other than that, I can find no recorded relationship, in spite of the fact that they did have so much in common. Both devoted their lives to God. Both pursued their callings as teachers first and artists second. Both were tireless, or as Sister Providentia put it, laborers of uncommon industry in the workshop of the Lord. Both were slight of stature, but strong of nerve and muscle and determination. In spite of obvious differences in the religious orders they belonged to, their dissimilar personalities, and their differing personal histories, at their core, they both shared a devotion to beauty, and it's their ideas about beauty, or what constituted beauty, that separated them. Sister Trinitas saw beauty in tradition, and she followed the classical masters who had gone before. Sister Trinitas saw beauty in the modern and the avant-garde. And although they disagreed on what constituted beauty, they did both live a life dedicated to its creation. So that is my tale of two sisters. Thank you.